At 1612 on November 14, 1944, the field near the village of Dabrowa looked quiet from a distance. But inside the M4A2 Sherman marked with the white guard stripe on its turret, the quiet was an illusion. The left track lay torn open across the churned mud like the exposed rib of an animal. The tank sat crippled at an angle, its hull tilted, the engine still idling low and uneven. Somewhere beyond the frost-covered hedgerow ahead, two German StuG III assault guns shifted positions, preparing to finish the Soviet crew. The commander said nothing. The gunner counted breaths. And the mechanic, Senior Sergeant Anatoly Sokolov, stared at the broken links and the loose track pins in his hands and wondered one question: how did it come to this? And how, in a place like this, was a crippled Sherman supposed to survive? The answer began hours earlier. The First Guards tank army had been moving through central Poland, pushing toward the Vistula. The terrain was deceptive. Fields looked flat from above, but winter had already begun tightening itself over the land. The ground was neither fully frozen nor soft. It was treacherous, a mixture of thin ice on top of deep mud. Trees stood stripped and skeletal along the road. Villages sat low and gray, smoke rising in thin lines from chimneys. German rearguards were still active everywhere. The Sherman column had orders: probe the approaches toward the railway embankment north of Dabrowa, avoid unnecessary engagement, and secure the line for infantry. That railway line mattered. If German armor reached it first, their guns would control the approaches for kilometers. Soviet doctrine demanded pressure, reconnaissance in force, armor forward, infantry following. But this reconnaissance depended on one thing: mobility. And mobility depended entirely on the tracks. Inside the tank, the crew felt the importance of it differently. They had lived with tracks their entire war, tensioning them, hammering guide teeth into alignment, clearing mud and ice from the rollers. A tank could fight with a cracked periscope, a weakened gun breech, even with a failing starter. But a tank with a broken track became a coffin. No one knew this better than Sokolov. He had been a tractor mechanic before the war, accustomed to stubborn engines and worn sprockets. On the Eastern Front, track work haunted him. He had seen a KV-1 immobilized by a rock jam in 1942, its crew burned inside when German artillery found them. He had seen a T-34 shed a track and slide into a ditch, unable to climb out. He did not fear engines. He feared tracks. So when command assigned him to a Lend-Lease M4A2, he studied its running gear like a doctor studies bone fractures. The Sherman had advantages: smoother ride, reliable diesel power, better crew comfort. But it had vulnerabilities. Frozen mud collected under the return rollers. Sudden turns under stress could twist the track. And in cold weather, especially mixed with Rasputitsa mud, track pins could shear under load. That morning, as the column advanced, Sokolov kept glancing at the track tension from his side hatch. He noticed how the left track oscillated slightly, slapping against a road wheel, then smoothing again. It was nothing unusual. But to him, it hinted at weakness. He said as much to the commander, Lieutenant Yegorov. "We should tighten, before the next village." Yegorov answered without looking back. "We do not halt for adjustments unless ordered." The Germans listen. Doctrine was doctrine. Halted tanks attracted artillery. They pressed forward, engines low, moving in staggered intervals along the tree line. Snow dust drifted sideways across the field. The radio crackled with short instructions from the battalion. Somewhere ahead, scouts reported German infantry and possible anti-tank positions near the embankment. The mission suddenly depended on speed. And that was when the ground changed beneath them. The Sherman dipped slightly as its left track slid into a rut hidden beneath snow. Sokolov grabbed the interior handrail by instinct. The driver corrected gently, trying to ease the tank back onto firmer ground. The commander ordered a shallow turn. The weight shifted. There was a metallic snap, not loud, but unmistakable. A vibration shuddered through the hull. The tank lurched, jerked, and then stopped. The engine still ran. The turret still could traverse. The gunner could still aim. But the left track had come apart. The crew froze for a second. They had all heard stories about snapped tracks. They all knew what it meant, especially this close to the front. Yegorov swore softly, then forced his voice calm. "Driver, neutral. Keep the engine warm. Nobody panics. We will repair." Sokolov opened the hatch, winter air cutting into his face. He looked down and saw the truth. One of the track pins had cracked and worked itself free. The track had spilled loose, sagging, half wrapped around the drive sprocket, half lying in the mud. This was not a minor inconvenience. This was the exact nightmare. He climbed out with the track hammer, crowbar, and spare pins. He could already feel time closing around them. Every minute spent outside the tank meant risk. German forward observers watched roads and fields constantly. An immobilized tank might as well raise a flag. The question now was not only how to repair the track, but whether they could do it before the Germans arrived. Within minutes, they learned the answer the hard way. The loader shouted down from the turret. "Movement. South hedgerow." Sokolov looked up. Through the drifting snow, two dark low silhouettes crawled along the edge of the trees, keeping their hulls hidden. Boxes instead of turrets. Long guns fixed forward. StuG III OSV. Classic German doctrine. Destroyer units deployed to kill immobilized targets. They had likely heard the column. They had likely seen the Sherman stop. Now they were moving in, slow, patient, careful. The radio confirmed what everyone already knew. Enemy assault guns. Do not abandon the tank. The commander looked at Sokolov, and Sokolov looked back at the torn track. The repair that once seemed difficult now bordered on impossible. He would have to realign the broken track, reconnect the links, and drive the pin home, under fire. Any delay would be fatal. The entire mission, the railway, the infantry behind them, none of it mattered if the tank died here. The snapped track had become the center of the war. Sokolov slid down from the hull and into the freezing mud, the crowbar cold in his hands. His breath came out in short clouds. He knelt beside the broken track and studied it like a surgeon looking at a wound. The left run had jumped the idler and twisted. The damaged pin lay somewhere beneath the mud. The remaining links had separated unevenly, one tilted upward, the other buried. He knew the procedure. They had practiced it during training. But training had never included German assault guns closing in from 300 meters. Inside the tank, Yegorov called out coordinates to the gunner. The 76 mm barrel turned, following the shifting silhouettes. They had only a narrow field of view. They could fire, but if the StuGs flanked them, the gun would be useless. Sokolov dug his gloved fingers into the mud, searching for the displaced pin. Instead, he found something worse. The guide tooth on one of the track shoes had bent. That meant the track would resist alignment. He would need to force it straight. That alone could cost minutes. 3 minutes, he muttered to himself. If they give me 3 minutes, we move. The driver watched him through the hatch. Say when to roll. Not yet, Sokolov answered. If you move too soon, we lose everything. German doctrine was clear, even to Soviet crews: immobilize, suppress, destroy. The StuGs did not rush. They crept. Their commanders preferred patience. A stationary tank meant an easy target. A distant blast shook the field as German artillery probed the horizon. Not aimed at the Sherman, yet, but searching. Sokolov placed the crowbar under the twisted link and pulled. The link lifted slightly, mud cracking around it. He positioned the loose end as close as possible to the buried segment. This was where track repairs usually required jacks or external assistance. But there was no time for that. Instead, he signaled to the driver. "Turn right track forward, slow. Half a meter." The driver eased the lever. The Sherman groaned. The right track crawled. The hull shifted its weight, pulling the loose left track closer to alignment. Sokolov guided it with the crowbar, forcing the steel teeth into line, millimeter by millimeter. A flash erupted at the tree line. The first German round screamed past, striking the earth behind the Sherman and exploding in a shower of frozen soil. The tank rocked slightly. Shrapnel hissed across the mud. The loader ducked instinctively. The gunner replied, firing a quick shot back at the vague silhouette. The round hit near the StuG but too high, gouging a tree trunk into splinters. There was silence for 2 seconds. Then another German shot came, more precise. It struck in front of the Sherman this time, short, ranging fire. They were marking distance. Sokolov kept working, ignoring the shock waves rolling through his body. His world narrowed, bent metal, cold steel, the stubborn refusal of the link to align, the knowledge that they were seconds away from destruction. He finally forced the 2 track ends close enough. Now came the worst part, reinserting a substitute pin. The original one was gone. He had a spare, but it was slightly worn. A worn pin under stress could shear again. He glanced at the spare pin, then at the broken guide tooth, then at the StuGs. A thought emerged, dangerous, desperate, purely mechanical. If the pin was loose, it needed reinforcement. Something to hold tension, even under forward motion. He opened the side stowage box and pulled out a coil of thick towing wire, field repair material often used for fenders or tool brackets. Not meant for tracks. But under Soviet logic, anything could become a part. He threaded the wire through the link holes, wrapping it around twice to draw the 2 track ends closer, using the crowbar as a lever to twist the wire tight. The wire creaked, tightened, and began pulling them into alignment. "Now," he whispered, and hammered the spare pin down with the track hammer. The sound rang through the cold, metal striking metal, each blow echoing the passing seconds. Inside the turret, Yegorov tracked the nearest StuG through the sight. The German vehicle paused, angled slightly to present its front armor, then fired. The shell struck the Sherman's glacis at an oblique angle and ricocheted, sending sparks into the air. The impact still shook the crew. "That one was meant to scare us," the gunner said, voice tight. "The next one would not be." Sokolov drove the last centimeter of the pin home. It held. Barely. The wire around it trembled under tension. Improvised. Ugly. But functioning. He climbed back onto the hull. "Forward slowly," he shouted. "No sharp turns. No sudden acceleration. If the pin comes out, we die." The driver acknowledged. The engine growled deeper. The Sherman inched forward. The repaired track climbed onto the drive sprocket. Sokolov watched it like a hawk. The wire strained, but remained intact. The pin stayed seated. For the first time in minutes, the tank moved under its own power. The commander saw the opening. Movement meant options. He ordered the driver to angle slightly toward the shallow depression to their right. Not a retreat, a repositioning, Soviet doctrine style, shift, fire, shift again. Make the StuGs recalculate. As they rolled, the gunner fired another round, this time at the second StuG, forcing it to brake and readjust. The Germans hesitated, briefly, surprised that their dead prey was suddenly mobile again. But mobility was fragile. 10 meters. 15. Then the left track snapped tight, jerked once, and Sokolov's heart froze. The wire groaned. The pin flexed inside its seat. He could feel the risk through the soles of his boots. The StuGs recovered and began advancing faster. The field had turned into a race between engineering and annihilation. And the repair he had just created might not survive the next 30 seconds. The Sherman crawled across the frozen mud like a wounded animal, every rotation of the left track threatening to tear itself apart again. Inside, nobody spoke. Even breathing sounded too loud. The driver eased the throttle carefully, keeping the movement slow and steady, never jerking, never turning sharply. The engine rumbled with restrained power it wasn't allowed to use. Sokolov crouched behind the turret, eyes fixed on the track below him. The improvised wire twisted tight around the links like a tourniquet. Each tooth of the track rose, bit the sprocket, and descended. If the wire snapped, the pin would slide loose. If the pin slid loose, the track would spill again. If the track spilled again, they would not have time for another miracle. Ahead, the shallow depression offered only partial concealment, not enough to disappear, but enough to complicate the StuGs line of fire. The German crews adjusted, methodical as always. They advanced in coordination, one moved while the other covered, maintaining overlapping arcs, patient, disciplined, deadly. Yegorov had seen this pattern before. "They will try to fix us in place," he said quietly. "Force us to stop. Then they finish us." The gunner waited for the command. He had only a brief window each time the tank angled slightly. The elevation was tricky. The Germans stayed low to the ground, black silhouettes against white. Sokolov called out without turning his head. "Do not stop. Whatever happens, do not stop. The track needs motion. Slow, steady pressure. If we halt, the wire loosens." It was a paradox, movement was danger, but movement was life. The nearest StuG braked, positioned itself, and fired again. The shell smashed into the ground just short of the Sherman, showering the hull with dirt and fragments. Something rang against the turret like a bell. The loader winced. Then the gunner fired back, carefully this time, exhaling before pressing the trigger. The Soviet round struck near the StuG's gun mantlet. Not a penetration, but close enough to make the German driver roll back a meter. It bought seconds. Seconds mattered more than armor. The depression deepened, and the Sherman slid into it, lowering its profile. The driver kept the hull angled, as instructed, never straight toward the enemy, always slightly askew. Snow crunched beneath the track. The wire creaked. Then came the sound Sokolov had dreaded, not a break, but a shift. The pin slid a fraction of a centimeter. He stared, heart pounding, calculating. The track had tightened unevenly. The tension now pulled at an angle. Any hard turn to the right would tear the repair outright. Any acceleration would stretch the wire past its strength. He closed his eyes for a brief second and made a decision that would either save them, or destroy the tank completely. He pounded on the turret. Use the depression. Reverse left. Let the track reseat itself. Yegorov hesitated. Reversing while under fire meant presenting a predictable path. But Sokolov's voice carried no doubt, only mechanical certainty. Do it. Now. The driver shifted. The Sherman rolled backward slowly, letting gravity help. The left track relaxed slightly as the weight shifted differently across the idler. The wire unwound half a millimeter, then tightened again, straighter than before. The pin settled. The track aligned. It worked. In the same moment, the second StuG moved aggressively, trying to flank around the right. It accelerated across the edge of the field, relying on its lower silhouette. German doctrine favored killing immobilized tanks from the side. They believed this Sherman was still half disabled. For a heartbeat, they were almost correct. But the tank was moving now, not fast, not free, but moving with intent. Yegorov gave a new order, quiet and precise. One shot. Only when you have certainty. The gunner waited. 30 meters. 25. The StuG began turning its hull to bring the gun to bear. During that turn, for a fraction of a second, its frontal armor lost its optimal angle. The gunner fired. The 76mm round struck just below the German driver's visor. A blinding flash erupted, followed by smoke pouring from the hatches. The StuG jerked, stalled, and lay still. The field fell silent for a heartbeat, except for the engine behind them and the rhythmic clatter of the wounded track. The remaining StuG did not charge. It stopped. Its commander had understood the danger. One disabled Soviet tank had just crippled a hunter. The calculus changed. German doctrine allowed withdrawal when position lost advantage. A puff of exhaust marked their decision. Slowly, cautiously, the remaining assault gun backed away toward the tree line, disappearing into winter haze. They were not retreating out of fear. They were preserving their asset. The Sherman did not chase. It could not. The track was holding, but barely. Sokolov knew it. The commander knew it. Even the driver could feel it through the controls. They eased out of the depression and linked back with the main column, which had finally advanced to cover the open ground. Infantry moved past them, rifles ready, glancing with curiosity at the wire-bound track. Artillery rolled forward. The battlefield shifted beyond them. Inside the tank, no one spoke for several seconds. Finally, Yegorov exhaled. Write it in the report. Improvised track restoration under fire. Temporary, but operational. Sokolov sat back, hands shaking for the first time. He looked at the wire, at the spare pin, at the mud frozen inside the links. The fix had not been clever. It had not been elegant. It had been desperate, brutal, and barely within reason. That night, at the field workshop, mechanics gathered around the Sherman like doctors around a survivor. They photographed the track. They measured the bent link. The regimental engineer wrote in his notebook, temporary binding by towing wire held under low speed. Extremely dangerous. Not recommended, but effective in emergency. In his personal diary, Sokolov wrote something different. The track is memory. It remembers every mistake. Months later, historians would argue over the report. Some insisted the wire could not possibly have held under combat conditions. Others pointed to the photographs, the diary entry, the scorched StuG wreckage recorded nearby. Debate continued quietly, half believed, half dismissed, like so many strange battlefield stories from the Eastern Front. But for the men of that Sherman, the truth needed no agreement. A snapped track had become a death sentence. And a piece of twisted wire had turned it into a chance. Thank you for watching, and remembering the forgotten mechanics who kept tanks alive when nothing else could.